Linda had always dreamed of escaping the chaos of San Diego and starting a peaceful life in the countryside. When she found a beautiful 50-acre farm in Ravenwood Valley, she knew it was perfect, a place to grow organic produce, harness renewable energy, and finally breathe freely away from the corporate world. At first, everything seemed idyllic. She spent her mornings tending to her crops, watching the sun rise over rolling green fields, and enjoying the quiet rhythm of farm life. But her dream was about to turn into a nightmare. One crisp autumn morning, Linda stepped onto her porch with a cup of coffee, savoring the stillness, until she saw something unbelievable. Strangers were walking through her vegetable gardens, picking produce, and taking photos near her solar panels. Children ran between her crops, trampling delicate seedlings. A group of elderly women stood near her wind turbines, chatting as if they were on a guided tour. Frowning, Linda set down her mug and strode towards them. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" she demanded. A woman, casually plucking tomatoes from her vines, looked up. "Oh, Veronica Black from the HOA said this is a community farm," she replied. Linda's stomach dropped. HOA? She had never agreed to anything like that. And then she saw it, the freshly installed wooden sign near her gate. Ravenwood Community Eco Farm. Open daily 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Her blood ran cold. What the hell was happening? Linda's pulse pounded in her ears. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her private farm had been turned into a public attraction, without her knowledge or consent. People were walking freely across her land, treating it like some kind of community park. She turned back to the woman still holding a handful of freshly picked tomatoes. "Who told you this was a community farm?" she asked, voice tight. The woman shrugged casually. "Veronica Black from the HOA. She sent out a newsletter saying your farm was part of a new sustainability initiative for Ravenwood." Linda's stomach twisted. She hadn't signed up for any initiative. Pushing through the crowd, she stormed toward her front gate, and that's when she saw it. The large, freshly installed wooden sign. Ravenwood Community Eco Farm. Open daily, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. A laminated schedule was tacked to the post underneath it. Farm tours, egg collecting demonstrations, composting workshops, all supposedly run by Linda. What the hell was happening? Taking a deep breath, she pulled the sign from the ground and marched back toward the house. But before she even reached her porch, her doorbell rang. Standing on her doorstep, dressed in a crisp beige suit and a practiced smile, was Veronica Black, the head of the Ravenwood Homeowners Association. Behind her stood two other HOA board members, their arms folded like they were ready to lay down the law. Linda crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "You've got exactly 5 seconds to explain why you turned my farm into a public zoo." Veronica's smile didn't waver. "Linda, when you moved here, you agreed to follow all HOA regulations. Section 12.3 states that any property with unique landscape features visible from community areas can be designated as a shared enhancement zone." Linda's eyes narrowed. "And? Your solar panels, wind turbines, and extensive gardens qualify under that clause," Veronica continued smoothly, "which means they can be used for community engagement and education." Linda clenched her jaw. "There is nothing in the HOA bylaws that allows you to open my property to the public without my consent." Veronica sighed, feigning disappointment. "We've already scheduled farm tours for this weekend. 40 families have signed up. It would be a shame to disappoint them." Linda's fingers curled into fists. "Cancel it." For the first time, Veronica's smile slipped. "I don't think you understand, Linda. This isn't a request. If you refuse to comply, you'll face daily fines, $200 per violation." Then, as if to add insult to injury, she handed Linda a thick folder. Inside were photographs of her property, red circles drawn around her chicken coop, her vegetable beds, her compost bins. Every single one had been labeled as a violation. Linda's blood ran hot. "You're trying to force me into this." Veronica smiled again, this time with no pretense of warmth. "Do what you must, but I'd advise you to reconsider. We wouldn't want your peaceful little farm to become a legal headache now, would we?" And with that, she turned and walked away, the other board members following. Linda stood frozen in her doorway, gripping the folder so tightly her knuckles went white. She had come to Ravenwood Valley for peace. Instead, she had just stepped into a war. What would you do if someone tried to take control of your land? If you think Linda should fight back, comment #Stand with Linda below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next shocking twist in this insane battle. Linda slammed the folder onto her kitchen table, her hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just about fines or rules. This was a blatant power move. The HOA wasn't just trying to regulate her land, they were trying to take control of it. She flipped through the pages, scanning each so-called violation. Composting bins, labeled as a health hazard, chicken coop, alleged unauthorized livestock. Even her rainwater collection system had been marked as an unsightly structure. Linda exhaled sharply, forcing herself to think. This was strategic. The HOA was weaponizing its own rules to make her life miserable, hoping she'd give in to their demands. But they had underestimated her. That night, she stayed up late, poring over every document she had. The HOA's bylaws were extensive, but Linda had a sharp eye for contracts. Years of business dealings had taught her one thing: there's always a loophole. And then she found it. Buried deep in the legal jargon, a clause that invalidated the HOA's authority over properties classified as agricultural heritage sites. Her farm, originally owned by a family of farmers for over 80 years, fit the definition perfectly. A slow smile formed on her lips. They thought they had her cornered. They were wrong. The next morning, Linda stepped outside with her coffee, ready for a quiet moment before putting her plan into action. But instead of peace, she was met with something even worse than before. A tour group. A neatly dressed woman in a HOA-branded polo shirt stood near her chicken coop, enthusiastically speaking to a group of parents and children. For just $5, kids can hold a real chicken and learn about farm life, she announced brightly. Linda's jaw tightened. They were making money off her property. She stormed toward the woman. "Excuse me, who gave you permission to do this?" The woman blinked at her, confused. "Oh, Veronica Black hired me to run the farm experience while she's at her salon appointment." She held up a laminated badge that read, "Ravenwood Estates Community Guide." Linda didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the badge, the woman, and the tour group trespassing on her land. Then, she turned to the visitors, her voice sharp. "This is private property. You need to leave. Now." Some parents murmured apologies and hurried away, but others grumbled about ruined plans. One woman scowled. "We already paid the HOA for this tour." Linda stiffened. They were charging money for this? She forced a tight-lipped smile. "Then I suggest you ask for a refund." As the last of the tour group wandered off, Linda watched them go with narrowed eyes. HOA wasn't just overreaching, they were profiting. Linda wasted no time. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, she could play dirtier. That afternoon, she drove into town, heading straight to the county records office. She spent hours flipping through old zoning files, scanning decades-old documents. And that's when she found the final piece of the puzzle, a legal designation filed by the original owners. The land wasn't just agricultural, it was protected. The HOA had no jurisdiction over it. Linda smirked. They had spent weeks trying to break her. But now, she had exactly what she needed to break them. Linda drove home with a new sense of purpose. The HOA thought they had won, but they didn't know what was coming. She had the law on her side, and now it was time to use it. The moment she stepped into her house, she got to work. Emails, phone calls, and official reports. She documented everything. Photos of unauthorized tour groups, proof of the HOA charging money for farm visits, and most importantly, the county records proving her farm was protected land, exempt from HOA control. That night, as she sipped her tea, a thought struck her. The HOA had been using her land for profit, but what if they had done the same to others? She started digging. Linda spent hours searching online forums, local complaints, and old news articles about Ravenwood Valley's HOA. What she found was worse than she imagined. Multiple former homeowners had been forced to sell their properties after being drowned in false violations. A local cafe mysteriously shut down after refusing to comply with HOA's beautification guidelines. One man had even gone missing after a legal dispute over his land. His case was still unsolved. A chill ran down Linda's spine. This wasn't just about money or power. This was something darker. She scrolled through archived court documents and stumbled upon a name she recognized: Veronica Black. She had been involved in several legal disputes over land acquisition in other communities, and every time it ended the same way. Owners forced out, HOA taking over. Linda clenched her jaw. They had done this before, and now they were trying to do it to her. The next morning, Linda was outside watering her crops when she heard the unmistakable roar of an engine. She turned just in time to see a bulldozer pull up near the edge of her property. Behind it, Veronica Black and 3 HOA board members stood watching. Linda stormed towards them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Veronica smiled sweetly, but there was a dangerous gleam in her eyes. "Oh, Linda," she purred. "You failed to comply with HOA modifications, so we're making the necessary adjustments for you." Linda's stomach dropped as she saw orange flags planted across her field. They were marking new walking trails for the community, on her land. She folded her arms, voice steady but cold. "This is trespassing." Veronica's smile didn't waver. "Actually, it's not. Section 8.4 of the HOA bylaws states that non-compliant properties can be adjusted for community use." Linda felt fury rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Veronica leaned in slightly. "You can fight this, but we both know how it ends." She gestured to the bulldozer. "Do you really want to see your farm torn apart, Linda?" Linda inhaled deeply, then pulled out a thick manila folder. "Actually, Veronica, I think you'll want to see this first." She handed the folder to one of the HOA board members. As he flipped through it, his face slowly drained of color. County records, legal documents, the original agricultural land agreement that overruled HOA authority. Veronica grabbed the folder, scanning its contents, her expression darkening with each page. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Linda smiled. "This land is legally protected. You have no right to modify anything. In fact, if that bulldozer so much as touches my soil, I'll be filing a lawsuit against you personally." Silence fell over the group. Even the bulldozer driver shifted uncomfortably. Veronica clenched her jaw. "This isn't over." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I know, but you just lost the first round." Veronica turned on her heel and walked away, her board members scrambling to follow. The bulldozer backed up and drove off. Linda exhaled, her heart still pounding. This was only the beginning. The HOA wouldn't back down easily, but neither would she. The morning after Linda shut down Veronica's attempt to bulldoze her land, she woke up to an unsettling sight. Every single one of her crops had been destroyed. Her once thriving vegetable beds were trampled, plants ripped from the ground. The wooden fencing around her chicken coop had been smashed, and the rainwater collection barrels were knocked over, spilling their contents onto the soil. Linda's blood ran cold. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. She gritted her teeth and pulled out her phone. The security cameras. Rushing inside, she opened the footage from the previous night. At exactly 2:47 a.m., shadowy figures moved across her land. 4 people. Hooded. Faces obscured. They moved quickly, slashing vines, kicking over equipment, and smashing the coop's fencing before disappearing into the darkness. Linda felt her hands tremble as she rewound the footage. They weren't just trying to intimidate her anymore. They were actively trying to destroy her livelihood. She took a deep breath, then picked up her phone and dialed. "Sheriff Grant," she said, forcing her voice to stay even. "I need you at my farm. Now." 30 minutes later, the sheriff's truck pulled into her driveway. Sheriff Grant, a burly man with sharp eyes, stepped out and took one look at the destruction before shaking his head. "You've got trouble, Linda." "I know." Her voice was cold. She led him inside and played the security footage. He watched in silence, his jaw tightening. When the video ended, he sighed. "I can't make out their faces, but this wasn't random vandalism. Someone wanted to send a message." "We both know who's behind this," Linda muttered. "It's the HOA." The sheriff scratched his chin. "Problem is, knowing it and proving it are 2 different things. But if you file a report, I'll make damn sure this is investigated." Linda didn't hesitate. "Do it." That afternoon, just as Linda was fixing her fencing, she spotted something even worse. A formal notice taped to her front gate. She tore it off and read, "Cease and desist order. Immediate action required." Her breath hitched. They were trying to sue her. Veronica's name was printed boldly at the bottom. The document accused Linda of violating HOA rules by refusing community access, operating an unauthorized business on residential land, defaming the HOA with false accusations. Her stomach twisted. This was their plan. First, they tried intimidation. Now, they were using the legal system against her. But what Veronica didn't realize was that Linda had spent years dealing with corporate legal teams. She smirked and marched inside, grabbing her own stack of papers. Veronica wanted a legal battle. She was about to get one. Linda stood at her kitchen table staring at the cease and desist order from the HOA. They thought they could bully her into submission, using legal threats to force her off her own land. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. She had spent years navigating high-stakes corporate contracts, negotiating deals with billion-dollar companies, and she wasn't about to be intimidated by a group of overreaching suburban dictators. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her laptop and started drafting her response. Linda wasted no time. She filed a counter-lawsuit against the HOA, citing property destruction and trespassing from the vandalism caught on her security cameras, fraudulent financial activities, charging the public for unauthorized farm tours, defamation, accusing her of violating rules she was legally exempt from. She attached every piece of evidence she had, the security footage, the fraudulent tour schedules, and most importantly, the county records proving her land was protected. Veronica Black had just walked into a trap. The next morning, Linda took her case to the local press. She met with a journalist from the Ravenwood Tribune who was more than eager to dig into the HOA's corruption. Within 24 hours, the headline was everywhere. HOA accused of land grab scheme, homeowner fights back. The article detailed how the HOA had attempted to seize Linda's farm under false pretenses, charging residents for unauthorized tours and possibly even orchestrating criminal activity. And then came the biggest revelation. As the journalists dug deeper, they uncovered financial records linking the HOA to a secret development project. Veronica Black wasn't just trying to control Linda's farm, she was trying to clear the land to sell it to a luxury housing developer. She had done this before, forcing other homeowners out, making it look like violations had driven them away. Linda wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was exposing a massive scandal. By the afternoon, the damage was done. HOA members started receiving angry phone calls from residents, furious that their HOA fees had been used for illegal schemes. Even worse, city officials announced an audit into the HOA's finances. And then, just as Linda was fixing her garden fence, she saw a black SUV pull up in front of her house. Veronica Black stepped out, her face pale with rage. Linda crossed her arms, meeting her gaze. "Something wrong, Veronica?" Veronica clenched her jaw. "You don't know what you've just done?" Linda smirked. "Oh, I think I do." For the first time, Veronica looked afraid. And Linda knew. The war wasn't over yet. Linda stood her ground as Veronica Black stepped out of the black SUV, her sharp heels clicking against the gravel. There was no fake politeness this time, only cold fury. "You've made a mistake, Linda," Linda smirked. "Funny, I was about to say the same to you." She could see the tension in Veronica's shoulders. The HOA was collapsing from the inside, and Linda's legal action, combined with the media exposure, had thrown their entire scheme into chaos. But something about the way Veronica looked at her sent a chill down Linda's spine. This wasn't over. That night, as Linda sat at her desk preparing documents for her upcoming court hearing, a loud bang shattered the silence. Her front window exploded, shards of glass flying across the room. Linda hit the floor instinctively, heart pounding. The sound of a car engine roared outside, tires screeching as it sped off into the darkness. Breathing heavily, she pulled herself up, carefully stepping over the broken glass. A brick lay on the floor. Attached to it was a note. "Drop the case or you won't be so lucky next time." Linda's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was a direct threat. The next morning, Sheriff Grant arrived with his deputies, surveying the damage. "This is escalating, Linda," he muttered, shaking his head. "This isn't just HOA politics anymore. Someone's getting desperate." Linda exhaled sharply. "And I'm not backing down." The sheriff sighed, then handed her a folder. "Good, because you're going to want to see this." Linda flipped through the papers, her eyes widening. Financial records proving the HOA had funneled thousands of dollars into consulting firms tied to real estate developers. Emails linking Veronica Black to illegal rezoning deals. And the worst of all, a document showing that Veronica had been secretly selling off farmland even before getting owner approval. They had proof, real, undeniable proof. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, they were criminals. Linda looked up at the sheriff, fire in her eyes. "I hope Veronica enjoys orange," she muttered, "because she's about to get fitted for a jumpsuit." The sheriff chuckled. "Let's bring her down." As she watched the squad cars roll toward the HOA headquarters, Linda knew this battle was coming to an end. But she also knew one thing for certain. Veronica wouldn't go down without a fight. Linda stood outside the Ravenwood HOA headquarters, watching as squad cars pulled up. Sheriff Grant and his deputies stormed into the building, warrant in hand. She knew Veronica Black wouldn't go quietly. Minutes later, Veronica emerged in handcuffs, her once perfect posture stiff with rage. She barely spared Linda a glance as she was shoved into the police car, but her eyes burned with a silent threat. "This isn't over," she hissed. Linda smirked. "Oh, but it is." The media descended on the scene, snapping photos as HOA board members were questioned by officers. It turned out several of them had been part of the fraud scheme, pocketing money from illegal property sales and HOA fees. By the afternoon, the news had spread across Ravenwood Valley. The HOA was officially dissolved. Residents were refunded for fraudulent farm tours. Linda's land was fully reinstated as private property, untouchable. But the biggest victory? Every single homeowner the HOA had targeted now had the chance to fight back. In 2025, homeowners still face overreaching HOAs, corporate land grabs, and legal loopholes used against them. Linda's story is a reminder that knowledge is power. Understanding your property rights is crucial. Don't sign HOA agreements blindly. Document everything. Linda's security footage, financial records, and county documents won the battle. Expose corruption. When she took the fight to the media, the HOA collapsed under public pressure. In an age where big corporations and corrupt organizations try to control everything, Linda's battle shows us. One person can make a difference. As she watched the last police car drive away, Linda didn't feel relief. She felt purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She decided to open a legal aid program for homeowners facing HOA abuse, ensuring no one else in Ravenwood would be forced into the same nightmare. But what about you? Do you think Linda should expand her fight to expose corrupt HOAs across the country? Drop a comment below and let us know. And remember, never let bullies take what's yours.